there's definitely been a recalibration of the Saudi strategy, and the reason for that is very clear. The ground has shifted beneath the feet of all the actors in Syria over 3 long years of a brutal conflict. So I think, yes, there was this belief in the beginning that if arms were provided to some of these rebel groups, not all of whom were particularly savory characters, then Assad would be toppled and it would follow one of the other Arab Spring trajectories. That hasn't happened, and unfortunately ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra have taken on a very nasty sectarian and deeply religious perspective. And I think that the Saudis now are saying it is time to rein back our strategy and look for a new one, a more counter-terrorism strategy than an attempt to remove Assad by force.
And the fact that Prince Bandar is no longer the man in charge when it comes to Syria for Riyadh, how do you explain that shift away from him?
Well, yes, I mean, they've shifted it to Mohammed bin Naif, the interior minister. I think that is, as Olivier pointed out, something that has been brewing for some time now. The Saudis, ahead of this visit by Barack Obama, are going to be on the same page as the US. And I think as the threat of military action against the Assad regime has receded, the Saudis have recognized that the old strategy is no longer working and they have to find a new one. That's why you've seen them designate these 2 groups, and it's why you've seen them say to their nationals to be back within 2 weeks or face jail time.
All right. Comments coming in from a lot of viewers, including whatever happened to Arab Brotherhood. Is it that fragile, or is there no such thing to begin with? Haytham, MANNA, that order for all Saudi nationals who are fighting in Syria to return home, do you think it will be heeded?
I'll answer. But before, I must make some remarks about the intervention of our friends. First of all, al-Nusra, it's a really new thing in the dictionary of Saudi Arabia, because never they condemned Jabhat al-Nusra up to now. But al-Nusra, now we know that they are more pro Qatar than Saudi Arabia. And this is very important.
How do we know that?
You know, all of these people now are multi-financial sources, organization. They become very experimented people, and they have more than one country and more than group to be financed by. But these groups have a political orientation. We don't find, for example, Ahrar al-Sham or Islamic Front in this list, because Islamic Front, the head of Islamic Front, is pro-Saudian. But they have the same ideology. Both, they have the same ideology. There's no difference between Ahrar al-Sham, a member of Islamic Front, and al-Nusra.
But do you take Faisal's point that
Yes.
the strong criticism that Prince Bandar had made over the fact that the U.S. didn't intervene in Syria, that now they're pulling back from that because they realize it's never going to happen?
No, before that, you know that Islamic Front was really the child of Saudi Arabia first. And then Qatar tried to have an influence via Ahrar al-Sham, which had an historical relationship with Al-Qaeda. Abu Khalid al-Suri, we know, and Tartusi, we know that they were leaders in Al-Qaeda, number 4 and 1 in the direction. Now the situation is that you have 2 directions. One is of Saudi Arabia, which is Zahran Alloush and Islamic Front, and the other, al-Nusra, is more than pro-Qatari than other thing. We know that al-Nusra has always a good relationship with many journalists and many personalities which are classified as terrorists in Qatar. And for that, you have this problem of division between 2 forces,
Right,
the
so
Free Army and Islamic Front.
So there's what's
Saudi Arabia.
There's what's
and, yes, and the other side, you have the pro-Qatari.
All right,
forces.
so there's what the palace says, and then there's what happens actually in the field. Faisal, YAFAI.
Just let me respond to what Haytham was saying. I have an enormous amount of respect for Haytham's views, and as you see there, the detail that he's talking about is absolutely correct. There is this fragmentation of the Syrian civil war, but let's not lose sight of the fact that it did not begin like this. The end that we see today was not foreseeable at the beginning. All of the other Arab Spring countries had come to some resolution very rapidly, and I think the Saudis and other backers like the Turks really believed that they could end the conflict swiftly. That is what they were trying to do. It is what actually I've been arguing the international community should have done as well. Since that hasn't happened, it's the fragmentation that has led us to this place, to the detail that Haytham was pointing out. And that, I think, is why the Saudis are now sort of shifting as the Americans are.
All right, so that's scaring off at least the leaders in Riyadh. Certainly, though, there's no quietening of the tone within the Syrian National Council. That's the opposition group in exile whose president, Ahmed al-Jarba, backed by Riyadh, and who narrowly beat out a Qatari-backed candidate last year to run the organization. He was vocal at a weekend Arab League meeting in Cairo.
After the failure of Geneva II and the oppressive invasion of Yabrud, there's no space for diplomacy or political solutions. They, the Syrian regime, have responded to our positive position with a clear message refusing the political solution by launching tank rockets and dropping explosive barrels from airplanes on civilians. And the response to this must be the same.
All right, so tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, and that again by the guy who's backed by Saudi Arabia.
No, you know, the problem with the Syrian National Coalition is that they only represent themselves. They don't have any material control over the Islamic fighters underground in Syria.
Haytham, you agree?
Yes, and it's a fact, and I think no one can question this. That being said, I think chronology is of importance. The simple fact that you've got the Saudis today calling back their citizens, declaring these movements, the Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, as terrorists, is important. It's only happening today, as was mentioned. These movements have been designated as terrorist organizations for more than a year by the international community, including the United States. This means that the Saudis and all these other folks have been financing these terrorist organizations for more than a year. And it's only now that they're changing.
And this
is a factual vindication of the assertion of the Prime Minister of Iraq, who's saying exactly the same thing, that the Saudis and Qataris are financing Islamic Sunni Wahhabi terrorism, and Wahhabi terrorism is basically an oxymoron, in the area. And why are they changing this? Because we should remember, Obama is going to visit the Saudis end of this month. And they want to provide a better picture to the Americans, saying that, look, we've changed our attitude. We're no longer going to throw money at these terrorist organizations, as you wanted us to abstain from doing, and we'll try to behave correctly. And they're also witnessing one genuine fact in the area. That is, despite the fact that they're fighting against each other, there is a Shia-Sunni rift that is also increasing, and that's what Nuri al-Maliki pointed out recently. And that is of fundamental importance.
All right, let's go to Nuri al-Maliki. First, I'll tell you about, again, lots of comments from viewers. One of them saying they use the term terrorism for their narrow political advantages rather than as a security measure, with a mix of Sunni tribesmen and jihadist radicals overrunning parts of the Ramadi, the capital of Iraq's Anbar province in December, battling since both there and in Fallujah. Iraq's prime minister brushing aside talks of proxies and private initiatives. Speaking to France 24's Mark Perlman on Saturday, Nuri al-Maliki squarely blaming the Saudi and Qatari governments alike for the rise of Sunni radicals both in Syria and Iraq.
Those countries are mobilizing jihadists. Those jihadists coming from Europe, coming from Belgium, from France and other countries, European countries. Who brought them here? Those are commissions, Saudi commissions, that are organizing all this to attract those jihadists, to lure them, to get them into fighting in Iraq. And since Saudi Arabia forbade from its citizens to travel to Syria and to Iraq, they turned to the Western countries of the Arab world and to Europe to attract new jihad fighters.
Olivier Delage?
When you see the region with the eyes of a Saudi, this guy has been put in power by the Americans. and he's the proxy for the Iranians. So obviously, I mean, they feel encircled, surrounded by enemies.
By the way, the Saudis this Monday coming out with a statement saying that his remarks were dangerous and irresponsible.
Well, that's the least they could say after what they heard. But the fact is that they did not recognize the elections in Iraq. They kept him at bay, and obviously he's paying back in kind.
Faisal al-YAFAI?
This is a very important point from Olivier. It is unfortunately Mr. Maliki speaking with the voice of Iran. This is actually incredibly dangerous rhetoric. It really escalates the situation beyond where it needs to be. And to hear Nouri al-Maliki, of all people, the man who has been prime minister of Iraq for more years than anyone else this century, the man more responsible for the sectarian divide in Iraq today than any other person, for him to be saying that it's the Gulf states fomenting sectarian hatred is really astonishing. You start to wonder what world he's living in. The fact of the matter is that it is Maliki who has been promoting this sectarian divide to shore up his own Shia support. And if he is seeking to take one of the most important Arab countries into Iran's orbit, he cannot be surprised. And at the same time, marginalizing his Sunni population, 40% of whom, 40% of Iraqis are Sunnis. So if he's expecting that the Gulf states and the rest of the Arab world are going to sit back quietly while one of the most important Arab states is taken into the Iranian orbit, he's really got to reconsider his position. I recognize that in a month's time he will face election, but there's a difference between politicking and naked, willful forgetting of the facts.
Ardavan?
Nouri al-Maliki, contrary to the other Persian Gulf monarchies, was elected. I mean, he may be in power for some time, but he didn't come to power through a coup d'etat. Sorry, as Faisal puts it, voted into power by coup d'etat. This man is elected. And today, what he hasn't been throwing dynamite at the Sunnis. What is happening today in Iraq is the civil war in Syria overflowing.
He hasn't been throwing dynamite at the Sunnis, but he did.
No, but I mean, he's reacting. He's reacting to what is
he did
pouring
hit
out
his
of
vice
Syria.
president with charges. There was the killing of a bodyguard.
But that's not civil war. But what is happening today is what is pouring out of Syria into Iraq. Look where the strife is concentrated. It is not in the Shia south. It is not in the Iraqi Kurdistan. It's right across the Syrian border. And these are people, they're same guys that have been qualified as terrorists and have been withdrawn by the Saudis yesterday, are the same guys who are going across the frontier, creating local difficulties at Fallujah and at Radi. It's the same story. And what he's doing today is that he's calling in his army to maintain control of the unity of the country. The civil war in Syria is spreading into Iraq with the same financial backers as the Islamist terrorists had in Syria, meaning Saudi Arabia and the others in the area.
Haytham, MANNA, this brings us back to Barack Obama's visit later this month.
Before visit Obama, I think there is a problem between our friend Faisal
and Ardavan.
You know, in Iraq, really, if you take the historical recent events, the first speaking about a house, a sectarian house, was by some people. One of them is al-Maliki. And al-Bayt al-Shi'i, the Shia house, was the idea to win elections, because we have a majority of Shia in Iraq, and we can win elections rapidly with this propaganda. And many TV before Saudi Arabia, sectarian TV, were authorized in Iraq, unfortunately. Now he understands that it was a great mistake, and now he pays the price, because now we have more than 100 TV, sectarian TV, Sunni against Shia and Shia against Sunni, and we have really an ideological war and a religious war between two great groups, and we pay the price in Syria and Iraq. For that, if you take now this declaration of Maliki, you can put it easily in the electoral propaganda, because he prepared the new elections in this time.
Olivier,
many governments in the area played that sectarian card just to delegitimize the opposition. It happens in Saudi Arabia, it happens in Iraq, it happens in Bahrain. It's not much talked about, but this is very important, what's happening in Bahrain, and to a lesser extent elsewhere. And the idea is to prevent Sunni or Shia who oppose the government to get together. And it succeeds.
All right. On Twitter, this comment, surely not the diplomacy you'd expect from diplomats, more like tit for tat. That a reference, I think, to the Qataris versus the Saudis. They need an intervention. I don't know what Shuja means by that, but we'll get back to that point later. Let me ask you, Faisal YAFAI, again, this brings us to Barack Obama's visit later this month to Riyadh, his first since 2009. What does he need to be saying, the U.S. president?
Actually, I don't think that anything Barack Obama says is going to make a difference. And I think that's really the essential point. And we've seen it all across the region. And actually, we're seeing it in Ukraine today, that the problem has been that Barack Obama has played to his strengths, and his strengths have been speaking rather than acting. That's one of the reasons why the region is in such a difficult situation. Certainly in Syria, it is because Barack Obama and the Americans put forward these spurious red lines about chemical weapons use, which the Assad regime happily trampled across, and then the Americans backed off and said, well, that's life. The same sort of thing happened with Ukraine and the Crimea and the Russians' intervention. The fact of the matter is, when the Americans have tried to involve themselves in the region without understanding the dynamics of the region, it has gone wrong, as in Iraq. When the region was speaking to them with a clear voice, a very clear voice, 2 years ago, and saying the situation in Iraq and Syria will consume all of us, you need to find a solution to this, their only response was to let it run and let it run and let it run. And as we were saying earlier, the ground shifted. It is not merely that the fight has changed. It is, as Haytham pointed out, that this opening of the Pandora's box of sectarianism has consumed the entire region. It's become a real thing. It wasn't a real thing before, but it's become one. So I'm not quite sure what Obama can come and say. What I'd like to have is for him to come and do something.
Haytham, MANNA, you're someone who's been against an arms race over Syria and against fighting to resolve the conflict. What were the United States' options 2 years ago, and what are the options now?
I'm against, but really all of us suffer from the absence of a strategy of Mr. Obama in the Middle East.
What could that strategy be, though, at this point?
He don't have any map road. He don't have any really answer for many questions. And now you have two positions sometime in 1 week from the States, sometimes from Kerry here and from him in the other side. And our problem that we don't know what he can do when he will go to Riyadh or to Amman or to any capital. I don't know what will he propose for these people. To attack Syria from the south, for example, ask Jordanian and Saudi to do a job which they cannot do, or to support military some groups, or he don't have any plan.
All right, so yeah, but what does Barack Obama do at this point? What is his strategy? If it's not in military intervention, what is it?
You know, when you don't like to intervene military, you must push the political solution to be a reality. And he didn't help for any political solution.
But you see, a political solution means bringing the Iranians and the Russians in, and at this point in time...
No, I'm speaking, for example, about Syria. About Syria, really the role of, the responsibility of Americans and Russia in the field of Geneva II is clear. It's not Brahimi who was the reason of what happened.
Ardavan.
Obama is going into Saudi Arabia so as to try to amend the broken relationship. The Saudis never digested the fact that the Americans embarked upon this rapprochement with the Iranians months and months before Rouhani was elected in secret talks in Muscat in Oman, and they felt totally kept out of it. And they're fearing the energetic independence of the United States. They're fearing the increasing oil export capacity of Iraq. They feel that America is turning elsewhere and abandoning them in the Middle East into the hands of a rising Iran. They are panicking, and the way they act in the entire area is a consequence of what they feel is a behind-the-scenes entente between Iran and the U.S., and they may not be wrong.
So, Olivier, how does the Saudi leadership feel when it sees images of the European Union diplomacy chief, Catherine Ashton, wearing her veil in Tehran.
They feel exactly like Netanyahu. They're not happy, but they can't do much about it. And vis-à-vis the US, they've been furious for the past 3 years. But I think that this visit tells something. Nothing spectacular is going to come out of it, but they need to be reassured, that's true. And only 3 years ago, the Saudis prevented top officials from the US to visit Saudi Arabia. Now, at the end of the day, they know that both from Washington and from Riyadh, that they need each other. They're not very happy about it, but I mean, there is no alternative.
Faisal al-YAFAI, is something broken for good between Washington and Riyadh?
No, it's not broken at all. It can be mended. Ardavan's analysis of this is absolutely correct. It is the Saudis who are very concerned about this rapid rapprochement between the Iranians and the Americans. Can it be fixed? Of course it can, but it will take real action and it will take real reassurance on the part of the Americans. Remember, the monarchies of the Persian Gulf have spent a lot of time, energy, and money to help the Americans, and they have been very good allies to the United States. And so when they see their traditional ally, the United States, shifting and moving into the orbit of one of their bitter enemies, the Iranians, you can imagine that they don't take it very kindly. I think it'll be that discussion that you will hear coming out of Riyadh when Obama goes there later this month.
And Faisal, this ages-old rift between the Sunnis on the one hand, the Shiites on the other, is there any way to overcome this?
Well, I don't believe that this rift is real. This is a particular, actually, I think I've said it's an Orientalist perspective from the perspective of Europe, because Europe, of course, had these wars between the Protestants and the Catholics. Nothing on that scale has ever existed between the Sunnis and the Shia. And if you talk about the regional countries, Yemen, Iraq, Iran, there is an enormous amount of intermarriage, enormous links, enormous ties of friendship, of family. The idea that there is this discrepancy between the Sunnis and the Shias is ridiculous. It is entirely a political construction. Once the politics are fixed, the religious element will go away.
Well, I hope that Faisal is right. I need to thank him, by the way, for having called the Persian Gulf by its genuine name. But that being said, we need to acknowledge one fact. This rift between Shia and Sunni has been ongoing for more than 1,000 years. People are dying by the dozens, by the hundreds in the streets of Syria. People are being imprisoned in Bahrain because they're Shia. We just can't say it's a configuration of the mind. At the end of the day, when you've got corpses, covering all streets and prisons full of this minority or that minority, there is a reality to this rift. Now, whether it's manufactured or not is a different story. But the reality is there is a confrontation. And behind the Shia-Sunni thing, we have to mention the Iran-Arab thing, because Shiism in the Arab mind in the southern Persian Gulf is considered to be a personification of Iran's expansionism.
All right. We're unfortunately going to have to leave it there. I see Haytham MANNA shaking his head.
But you forget modern and democratic project.
Yes. Which can help to overcome these differences.
To finish with this story.
Haytham MANNA, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Ardavan, AMIR, ASLANI, also Faisal al-YAFAI for being with us from Abu Dhabi, Olivier for joining us. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 today.